Earning your money, councillor. That's what that is.
Yeah, exactly. But I'm only...
Mr. Mayor, I assume we're going to hear the...
So, welcome. So item 7.1 is the Raymond Island Ferry Outage 2017 Internal Audit Report. Need a mover. There's a recommendation there.
Who wants to read it?
Moved Councillor Toohey. We've got a seconder. Yep. Councillor Ellis. Councillor Toohey.
That is the same as the recommendation on our paperwork, Mr. Mayor?
Yep.
I so move that Council, having considered the report on the independent audit commissioned by Council and undertaken by Crowe Horwath into a range of matters associated with the 2017 Raymond Island Ferry outage, provided at Appendix 1, notes that the report concluded that during the service outage, Council's procurement, contract management and reporting processes should have been more closely adhered to. Point B, of the 8 key recommended actions identified by the report and assigned to responsible council officers for implementation within specific timeframes, a number had been completed by the time this report was finalised. Point C, a quarterly report will be provided to Council's Audit and Risk Committee, providing progress updates on the implementation of the report's 8 recommendations. And point D, when all recommendations have been implemented, a detailed final report on the actions taken will be presented to the Audit and Risk Committee and through the committee to Council. And 2, resolves that this report, its attachments and all discussions in relation to this matter remain confidential.
Thank you, Councillor Toohey. Any speakers? I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Against? It's carried unanimously. Thank you. Item 7.2 is Contract 2019-1256 Can River Streetscape Works. There's a recommendation there. Do we have a mover?
Sure.
Moved Councillor Reeves. Have a seconder for that? Councillor Toohey. The recommendation. There's a motion. Please, Councillor Reeves.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. I move that Council accepts the tender submitted by Cameron Outdoors for contract CON 2019-1256 Can River Streetscape Works for the contract amount of $423,554 exclusive of GST. Signs and seals the contract in the form proposed and resolves that this report, its attachments and all discussions in relation to this matter remain confidential.
Thank you, Councillor Reeves. Is there any speakers? If not, I'll put the recommendation, or put the motion. All those in favour? Against? It's carried. Thank you. Item 7.3 is Contract 2019-1258. It relates to the Bairnsdale Streetscapes Works Stage 2, and there's a recommendation. Councillor Roberts, would you like to move the recommendation as a motion?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I move that Council 1 accepts the tender submitted by Cranes Asphalting and Bitumen Sealing Pty Ltd for contract CON 2019-1258 Bairnsdale Streetscape Works Stage 2 for the tendered amount of $1,166,791 inclusive of GST. And 2, signs and seals the contract in the form proposed.
So, Councillor Roberts, I think that was exclusive of GST.
Correction, exclusive of GST. Correction, thank you, Mr Mayor. And 2, signs and seals the contracts in the form proposed. And 3, resolves that this report, its attachments and all discussions in relation to this matter remain confidential.
Thank you, Councillor Roberts. We have a seconder for that motion. Councillor Reeves. Is there anyone like to speak to that? If not, all those in favour of the motion? Against? It's carried. Thank you. Item 7.4. Item 7.4 is the Recycling Services Temporary Relief Funding and Contract Variation, Contract 1148-1314 Waste Services. We have a recommendation. Councillor Ellis, would you like to move it as a motion, please?
Thank you, councillors. This matter is Recycling Services Temporary Relief Funding and Contract Variation, Contract 1148/1314 Waste Services. Motion being that Council, 1, delegates authority to the Chief Executive Officer to issue a deed of variation to Tambo Waste for the recycling elements of their existing contract, brackets, Contract 1148/1314, close brackets, to reflect the arrangements outlined in Appendix 1 of this Council report by the 30th of September 2018. 2, notes that the Chief Executive Officer shall also be drafting a letter to the Department of Environment, Land, Water and Planning which will detail how East Gippsland Shire has met the conditions of the recycling services temporary relief funding, including A, evidence that recycling pricing issues have been addressed in the Council's 2018-19 budget. B, evidence that by the 30th of June 2019, Council intend to incorporate a specific provision in their contracts with their recycling service providers that shows transparency around the cost borne by the recycling service providers in processing recycling materials, so that Council's recycling service provider will provide to Council a substantiated breakdown of costs involved in the processing and disposing of recyclable materials, and C, evidence that Council intends to incorporate model contract clauses into future curbside recycling service contracts. 3, that this report, its attachments and all discussions in relation to the matter remain confidential. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
So moved, Councillor Ellis. Do we have a seconder? Councillor White, thank you. Would anybody like to speak? Any speakers?
No, thank you.
All those in favour of the motion? Against? It's carried unanimously. Thank you. That concludes the agenda items for today, but I'd like, if Council would move a motion for us to hear a public question time, as we have the presenter of that public question in attendance now.
Yeah, I'm happy to move that, and I'd like also to be able to explain to Ms Moulton the actions that were taken earlier. So I move that Ms Moulton be permitted to present a question to Council.
Thank you, Councillor. Seconded, Councillor White. All those in favour? Against? That's carried. Thank you. Ms Moulton, would you like to come forward?
I just wanted to clarify that I didn't read the document carefully enough, and I did ask both Councillor Ellis and the officer on duty if I needed to be here for my question to be tabled or read out, and I was informed that I didn't have to be, so that's why I wasn't here.
Yeah.
I don't know whether I've taken an extract from the appendix of the arborist's assessment and report that underpins the proposal to deal with the trees on the Mitchell River precinct, and I'm calling into question the validity of the arborist's report as the basis for underlying the health and safety risk assessment, I feel, having read the report, the arborist's report, I think it's got its weaknesses. It's responding to a very narrow brief, and it doesn't assess the historic Aboriginal cultural or heritage value by its own admission of the trees, nor the ecological value of the trees as a habitat for Indigenous wildlife, which by its own statement in Appendix 3 on pages 6 and 7 of the appendix are other criteria on which trees should be assessed and considered in such a report.
Ms.
So
Bolton.
my question
Yes.
is, where is the report on the historic Aboriginal cultural and heritage value of these trees, and why is it not a factor in the decision making on the management of these trees and this site? And where is the report of the ecological value of these trees, and why is it not evidence in the decision making on the management of these trees and of this site?
Thank you, Ms Moulton. Ms Nelson, would you like to respond, please?
Yes, I can respond. The brief given to the arborists for this particular report, and there has been a number of reports provided to Council by independent arborists, was specifically narrow. It was about understanding the risk that was presented by the trees, and the reason for that very specific brief is because the approval that we have granted to us by the Commonwealth Government, it was the mechanism for determining the ecological or other values that the trees have, given their habitat for the bats, and approval was granted to remove those trees for, despite the fact that they provide that ecological purpose as habitat for the grey-headed flying fox. They are species that we have removed all the way along the river in accordance with riparian revegetation requirements established by the East Gippsland Catchment Management Authority, and despite the fact that it is habitat for grey-headed flying fox, approval was granted to remove them. The arborist report is simply about understanding the risk, we did not ask them to look at the other values.
Thank you, Ms Nelson. Question 2 was, where is the report of the ecological value?
The documentation that was submitted to the Commonwealth, which is the Revegetation Management Plan, which is published on our website, talks about the value. Ecologically, their value is as habitat, otherwise it's weeds.
Okay, thank you for that clarification, Ms Nelson. That was it? There was only 2. Thank you, Ms Moult. Yep.
Melton's here, Mr Mayor. Perhaps I could ask
Yes. Certainly, Councillor Ellis.
the question of what action was taken or what advice was given in relation to it being discovered. Mrs Moulton wasn't here. What would have happened to her questions earlier? And I'll clarify my stumblings here by going that is it true, Ms Bennett, that Mrs Moulton's questions would have been recorded in the minutes of this meeting, and that any responses would also have been appended to the minutes of that meeting, so that her questions were recognised? Thank you.
Yes, that's entirely correct, Councillor. I think from your comment earlier, I think you picked up from the form that you needed to be here. But because you weren't, we didn't read out the question, but you certainly would have received a direct response from the relevant council officer, and that response would be attached to the back of the minutes when they're published for the final time.
Thank you for that clarification, Ms Bennett. Being no further business, I'll close the meeting at 3:07. Thank you.